In 1947, a song was recorded in a small studio in New Orleans that nobody could explain. Not because it was strange, not because it was unconventional in its structure or its melody or its arrangement. Because nobody knew who wrote it. The recording session had been organized by a regional label called Crescent Sound. The label was small. It had existed for 3 years and had released 11 singles and had a distribution arrangement with a larger label that gave its records access to a handful of record stores across Louisiana and Mississippi. The session on July 14, 1947, was supposed to produce 2 songs. The artist was a pianist and singer named Lewis Farley, who had been recording for Crescent Sound for 2 years. Lewis was, in the vocabulary of the era, a journeyman, a musician whose talent was genuine and whose commercial success was modest and who filled a specific, valuable role in the ecosystem of regional music. He arrived at the session with both songs prepared. He recorded the first one. He was preparing for the second when the session engineer, a man named Pete Suarez, heard something coming from the waiting room. The waiting room at Crescent Sound was a small room off the main corridor. It had 3 chairs and a standing lamp and a window that looked out at the street. People waited there when sessions ran long. Pete heard piano. There was no piano in the waiting room. He went to investigate. What he found was a man he did not recognize sitting at the studio's upright piano, which had been moved into the corridor between sessions and had not yet been moved back. The man was playing something. Pete asked who he was. The man said his name. Pete did not recognize it. He asked what he was playing. The man said, "Just something." Pete listened for a moment. Then he asked if the man would be willing to come into the studio. The man said yes. He came in. He sat at the main piano. He played the thing he had been playing in the corridor. Lewis Farley listened from across the room. Pete Suarez had the recorder running. The song lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. When it was done, Pete asked the man if it was finished. The man said he thought so. Pete asked if he had a title. The man said no. Pete asked his name again for the session log. The man said it. Pete wrote it down. The man left. Pete included the recording in the session log under the man's name. The song was released as the B-side of Louis Farley's next single 3 months later. It was attributed to the man who had played it. The single sold modestly. The A-side got the attention. The B-side was noticed by a small number of musicians who heard it and described it to other musicians. Over the following decade, the B-side was covered 3 times by different artists. Each time the attribution was to the name in Pete Suarez's session log. And then someone tried to find the man to arrange publishing rights. They could not find him. Not because he was hiding, not because he had changed his name, because nobody could verify he had existed. The name Pete Suarez had written in the session log, copied carefully from what the man had told him, matched no musician in any record in Louisiana or Mississippi or any of the adjacent states. No birth record, no union membership, no prior recording, no subsequent recording. Just the name, and the 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The song circulated in the way of songs that are genuinely beautiful and have no clear origin story. It was covered and recorded and listed in catalogs with its attributed name. It appeared in 3 film soundtracks across the 1950s and 1960s. The publishing questions were eventually resolved through a legal mechanism that assigned the royalties to a holding account pending identification of the composer. Nobody came forward. In 1997, 50 years after the session, A music historian named Ruth Carver, who had been researching the history of Crescent Sound Records for a comprehensive study of New Orleans independent labels, came across the session log entry. She had been reading the session logs for 3 weeks. She was thorough. She noticed the entry because it was anomalous. An uncredited person appearing in a session log, a name she could not match to any other entry in any other log. She began trying to find the name. She looked in every place Ruth Carver looked, which was thorough because she was a serious researcher who had been working in this archive for 15 years. She found one reference in a letter written in 1945 by a New Orleans music teacher named Dorothy Pruitt to a former student who had moved to Chicago. Dorothy was describing the musicians she had encountered recently. She mentioned a young man. She used the name. She said he had been sitting in on sessions at various studios without making any commercial recordings. She said he had a gift for melody that she had not encountered in 30 years of teaching. She said he seemed to have no particular interest in a career. He seemed only interested in the music itself. Ruth Carver could find nothing else, no other mention, no record of what happened to him, no photograph, no subsequent reference anywhere in any archive she consulted. The song is still performed. It appears in catalogs under the name in Pete Suarez's log. The publishing account still holds the royalties pending identification. Ruth Carver's research is in the Tulane University Jazz Archive. She describes the 1947 session in her book on New Orleans independent labels, published in 2003. She devotes 4 pages to the song and the name and the inability to find the man. She ends the 4 pages with a sentence that has been cited by other researchers who have come across the same dead end. He left one song, under a name nobody can verify, in a session log for a studio that has been a parking lot since 1974. And the song is still being played, which is, perhaps, all he intended. Perhaps. A man in a corridor. A piano that had not yet been moved back. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. A name that goes nowhere. And a song that goes everywhere. Which is, of all the ways to exist in music, perhaps the most complete.